Welcome to another episode of The Crow's Nest. I am your host, Christopher Corvo, and on today's episode, I am joined here in the nest by the dynamic duo, Robert Avery, aka The Legend, and the Haitian Wanderer, Joseph Mark. And on today's episode, we will be discussing fear. Now, fear is something we all deal with. It's a basic human experience. So we are going to discuss our own experiences with fear, how it has affected us, its different root causes, and some of the things we try to do to overcome that fear or to at least mitigate it. These are just our experiences. Hopefully you get something out of some of the stories we tell. Some of them are definitely humorous, and you can hold them over us in the future. But it's something that we're going to share. We're going to learn some stuff about each other, and hopefully you learn something too. And if you have your own suggestions, your own techniques for overcoming fear, then definitely feel free. Share them. Shoot us an email. Reach out to us personally, because this is something I think we'll talk about again in the future. And if you give us some of your own tips and tricks, maybe we'll do a follow-up episode and try to share them with y'all. All right, but without further ado, I give you our next conversation. Hope you enjoy. Who wants to kick this episode off? Who wants to begin to expand on this idea of fear?
I do have a question.
All right.
Why is it on your mind?
Dude, I think fear has always been on my mind since I was like a little kid. I consider myself a relatively fearful person, I think. Yeah.
Why is that?
So, why? I don't know. That's a deep and psychological question. But
Okay.
I mean, honestly, if I have to delve into it, I think so. When I was a little kid, I don't know if you guys both know this or not. Maybe you don't. When I was 4, I was diagnosed with leukemia. So, right, you think 4 years old, you're in kindergarten, and there's a lot of things you learn you learn how to ride a bike, you learn how to do these things. But if you are someone who is, in an immune weakened state, there's a lot of things you can't do. So I think that experience kind of instilled in me a fearfulness and not even just a fearfulness, but a fear of taking chances and an overall risk taking. So I've noticed and I've thought about, I think fear has been part of my psychology for a long time, and it's something that I've had to like consciously attempt to overwrite and reprogram in myself. So that's why I kind of wanted to talk about this in a more broad sense, and to see if maybe your guys' view of fear and how it impacts your life is different than mine. And maybe I can pick up some tricks from you guys that might help me in my own battles with this human sensation that is fear. So that's kind of why, Joe, that I wanted to talk about this one.
Well, I knew about the disease that you had, but I didn't know that's where the genesis of this conversation would kind of come about.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask me, like, if you want the origin story, I think that's kind of my deep intimacy with this idea of fear is traced to. And it's weird, actually. I was having a conversation once with my mom, and, when things happen to you as a child, you don't necessarily pay attention to the ramifications later in life. Like, you don't pick up on the thread. And I remember I was talking to her once, and she was saying, oh, yeah, like that. For her, she said to me, trying to think how her exact words, but she said that I became aware of death very young, younger than a person really should. Little kids don't think about death. It's like it just doesn't happen, right? You don't really know about death until maybe you have a pet or a relative dies, and then your parents kind of say, hey, they have to have that conversation with you. So she thinks that I had that kind of realization very young, and it made me more hesitant, because you knew that there was repercussions to taking a chance, being adventurous. So I kind of always think that like has stuck with me for a long time. I had to like really push myself outside of that, inborn, I don't know, fear experience, fear calibration.
That's interesting. I was just going to ask what was the genesis, the origin of that fear. Was it a fear of death? Because fear comes in several different forms. There could be a fear of death and the unknown, right? There can also be a fear of, in terms of its catalyst is anxiety. I fear speaking in public. I fear high pressure situations and things of this nature. So fear has different forms. Also, just being frightened and terrified is also a different feeling. But they all go together, and they can all be summarized under the umbrella of fear. But it does take several forms, and that's interesting that I didn't know that about you, actually, Chris, and I've known you for a while. So it's news. That's news to me. But it's good. It's good. I like that we're vulnerable and sharing everything. So I guess I can kick it off with, let's talk about fear. Let's just jump right into that. Let's talk about a fear of death. And why do you two think that humans fear death so much? Is it a finality type thing? Or is it more that we don't know what happens to us? I have my own thoughts, but I'm interested to hear yours first.
Joe, why don't you start with that one?
I know for me personally, it's the fear of the unknown after death. Um, I know as a kid, it wasn't something I really thought of until I saw Terminator 2, and just seeing their version of the apocalypse really freaked the shit out of me. I've never seen uh, something like an atomic bomb go off and just annihilate all life as we know it. And for someone who is 9 years old to or 10 years old to watch that, it was kind of disturbing. And for a little bit, for the next few years, I was completely afraid of death. And it's the fear of the unknown for me, being somewhat of an atheist, not knowing what happens after death is kind of the thing that kind of makes death a lot more scarier than it should be.
So, Joe, are you talking about the scene where Linda Hamilton, Sarah Connor, is grabbing onto the gate and she's seeing the nuclear explosion and she turns into a skeleton? Because if so, that scene also freaked the fuck out of me. I think how old was I? I was like 7 when that happened. I don't want to see that. That was pretty traumatic, actually. But that's what makes. I know we talked about that film on the podcast before. That's what makes that movie so great. That movie is actually incredible. Shout out to James Cameron. Not the new Terminators. I think I shot. I think I shot on that already. The new Terminators stink, but the first two, classic.
Joe, so I have a question for you so you're saying for you, like, a part of fear is fear of mortality and the unknown. I mean, do you believe that there is something, or do you believe that it's just kind of done? And if so, shouldn't that kind of empower you rather than make you frightened?
So to answer your first question, I definitely feel that there isn't a higher being. At least for me, I think there's it's really more of we're just beings on this planet and we have to live our life. And just living in this quarantine actually has kind of crystallized things for me. It's made me realize, yes, we have a finite amount of time on this planet, and we should really try to go all out and live our life to the fullest. So these past few months have very much been an eye opener for me, uh, to try to really more enjoy the life that we have, however crappy it might be or whatever struggles might be in your way. You still have to make the most of it.
Yeah. I mean, that's deep. Yeah, I was just curious because it's like when you meet people who, and there's lots. I mean, it's, who believe that that you have this one go at it, and then there's really no continuation or no reboot or something else. It is kind of interesting how that can play out for them. Like for some, it is an empowering agent where, all right, it's like, it's a live show. There is no dress rehearsal. You got to give it your all, and then that's it. And then you have people that say that they don't believe that there's anything afterwards, But then it's kind of interesting how they live very like hesitant lives, and it's like, well, if you believe this is the only go at it, you might as well go big or go home, because it's like, what else is there? This is your time in the sun. So yeah, that's deep, dude.
Well, there's another aspect to it too. Like if you truly do believe there's only one go at it, some people might want to be very, very careful about the things that they do. So there's definitely like two sides to the same coin when it comes to that. It's just a matter of which philosophy you want to go about, and and what gets you to the end point of where you want to go.
Well, do you think your philosophy? Sorry, Rob, I don't know if I'm cutting you off. But Joe, do you think that
All
your
good, all good. Go ahead.
has your philosophy changed though? Are you saying that like with the quarantine, you've kind of flipped a switch and are now more of the latter?
A little bit, yeah. Definitely more of the latter, more trying to enjoy life and not trying to worry about as much. I mean, there's only so much I can do. I'm definitely someone who overthinks, but I've made it a point to just go out there and try to do the things that I want to do and not let doubt or failure really hamper my kind of goals or aspirations for now.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's cool, Joe. As a sidetrack, sort of, it does relate to Joseph's point, though. But the quarantine has been actually difficult for me for probably the same reason that Joseph just gave. I'm very analytical. The way my brain is wired, I analyze things, then I overanalyze things, then I reanalyze what I just overanalyzed. So that's the way I tick. That's the way my brain works. I can't help it, and that's good for two things. It's good in a work environment professionally because you it's very conducive to getting projects done and work done because my brain spins very intensely. However, in a situation like a lockdown or a quarantine, when you have a lot of idle time, and Chris, I think you said this in one of our prior episodes, idle hands and the idle mind is the devil's playground. Playground, excuse me, I can't talk today.
That's
Playground.
hilarious.
Idle, idle hands are the devil's playground, and so is the idle mind. So when I have so much downtime, because I think I've told both of you, there's times where I've done a bunch of work, I've done a bunch of my personal creative projects, we've done a podcast, I've done all these things, I've worked out, I've exercised, I've accomplished all of these goals that I had for that specific day. Then there's still 4 hours left where I'm not doing anything because I don't have that job where you work 8 to 10 hours and that takes a large chunk and you're doing those other stuff that I've been doing now during those a limited amount of free hours that you have. But you have that daily routine and purpose. That's what's been difficult for me, filling that void. How do I get my brain to stop going into a dark place to sometimes a place of pure fear, pure terror during these 4 hours, these 4 to 6 hours that I don't know what to do with myself. So what do you guys think about that? How does your guys' brain work in a scenario where you're just basically a glorified shut-in and you have to stay in and do that?
Joe, you want to take that one?
It's very much the same for me when it comes to the way you actually treat idle time, and you don't have much to really focus your energies on. I know for me personally, I really kind of try to find as many distractions as possible. I'll go on YouTube and try to watch a video, or I'll watch like an old NFL game, or I'll watch a movie. I know a big cathartic thing for me is music. Um, there was a point where I would listen to, especially during the quarantine, a lot of like older music, like 80s, 90s. And I find myself now kind of being bored. I'll listen to newer music to try to get the senses going a bit. But trying to find a distraction for me is a big part of it.
I think for myself, at least I have found in this is that I have not responded too poorly to it, and that might just be my natural disposition that I try to well, a couple things. One, I right from the get go, I really started to filter out like my news and my media consumption because I do find that that does affect me, and it's kind of like it's like a hidden thing. Like you don't really realize it. It just kind of sneaks up on you that you like, especially if you're consuming lots of, you're reading lots of articles or you're on Twitter or things like that. It's like I think some of those devices which can distract can also accentuate the problem. But I agree with Joe. It's like staying busy and also like becoming like laser focused. Like for example, I mean, this podcast was really helpful because it's like, all right, I have a project to work on. Like we're doing something. It focuses your mental energy on a project rather than like having your mental energy and your creative mind out in the world focusing on lots of things that you have no control over. So I think that's been helpful for me in the sense of like, what do I have control over? And the things I don't have any control over, I try to just eliminate them and block them from my mind.
No, I see what you're saying. Um, I find that extremely difficult, not because I'm incapable of doing it, but as you said, I've never in my entire life, in the 33 years, which is the master number of the universe for anyone listening, never, never in the 33 years of my life have I experienced anything like this. My mind, this is so foreign to the way my circuits operate that I've had to, it's been an extreme adjustment period. Is it getting better? Yes. It was much worse in April and May, where I had severe panic and anxiety. Like, there's times where I couldn't even fall asleep. Now I can at least fall asleep, but sometimes when I wake up, it's the problem. Sometimes we all wake up in the middle of the night from time to time. Sometimes when I wake up and then the mind starts spinning, I can't fall back to sleep. That does happen from time to time, but there was times in May and April when this was particularly bad and no one knew what the fuck was going on, where I slept like 40 minutes the entire night because I couldn't even get my brain to shut down because it was just firing on all cylinders. So I see what you're saying. Distractions are good, but what I was getting at is there's times where you run out of distractions. I've done everything that I've set out to do today. There are no more distractions. And now I've been thinking of what am I going to do to fill that void of that time. And that's the balance. That's the quote unquote the fear that I'm dealing with. Because there's times where it's 6 o'clock, I'm about to eat dinner, I've done everything I wanted to do today, and as you said, I'm literally genuinely in fear of what's going to happen to my mind afterwards because I have nothing to do afterwards. I don't know what's going to happen. So, like Joe said in the beginning, it's a kind of a fear of the unknown, which gets me. But so, what do you guys think of that? There's only a certain limit amount of things that you can do to distract your mind. Meditation is good because it gets you to slow down. It gets your heart rate down. It slows down your mind. I've been doing a little of that. Yoga is really good for that. So now that I can, there's yoga going on down here. You can, there's the gyms are open, so I can still do a little bit of yoga. It's not the same as when it was in New York. It's very simple and foundational and basic. But that's for me. That's how I slowed down and connected to the universe was through yoga and through meditation. So that's helped, but I still find it extremely difficult to slow down the way my brain's operating.
So here, let's take this to get back to this fear thing and to kind of bring what you're saying into it. I'm curious, like these sensations that you're talking about, these things that we call fear that you're undergoing. Like you said, my heart goes out to you because I can kind of imagine, like not wanting to go to sleep, like not being worried because you're like, oh no, now is when the mind's going to start to go and that feeling. What do you guys think is the reason why our bodies feel fear? And how are we supposed, like it's a sensation, right? It's a sensation. Just like the feeling of hunger or the feeling of thirst or any number of these things that kind of motivate us. What do you guys think? How do you think are supposed to process that sensation? Because that's what you're kind of talking about, right? It's like, how do you, like, I have this coming. I'm bombarded with this feeling. Now, what am I supposed to do with it? Is there something I should do with this or not?
For me, it's really two things. And you alluded to one of them. It's control. If I have control over what I'm feeling, then I'll do whatever I can to actually just mitigate it. If I don't, then there's no point in worrying about it. And the second thing is just to circle right back to find it, because my mind is very much like Rob's, where it'll race, and if I let it race, then I'm fucked. I'm done for. So I need to find a way to distract myself, and I'll kind of take my headspace and peel it back a little bit, and then reset. And that's the way I can try to get myself out of a fearful situation.
That's a good way to look at it. And I want you to know that's a talent, that's a skill. It takes training and practice to get to where you are able to, basically, you're on a wild horse, Joe, and you're trying to rein her in. It's really difficult. It's not, it sounds like the thing about the mental health issues is it's started as a stigma, especially for me growing up in New York. And I'm Joe, I'm interested to hear your take on this. So in the late 80s, early 90s, as a child growing up in New York, no one cared about mental health issues. In fact, if you did experience these kind of things that we're talking about, this fear of the unknown, this I don't want to lay down when it's quiet at night because I know my mind is going to go a mile a minute and I may go to a place where I don't want to go. And that scares me right now, thinking about it. These things were looked down upon as, you're a punk, you're weak. It was seen as a weakness. Whereas now I think we're in a better place where mental health is seen as, no, this is a serious issue. Depression, anxiety, these things are legitimate issues. They're not seen as, oh, suck it up, man up, pull up your bootstraps and get over it, because you shouldn't be suffering through that. So the way I grew up in New York, there was a stigma attached to quote unquote mental health issues because it was seen as a sign of weakness. You couldn't show that you were fearful or nervous or anxious because that made you look weak. So I grew. It's also a product of environment, and I'm glad for the newer generations now that everyone is kind of putting this to the forefront, and especially it comes from celebrities and athletes. And I'll just give you. I hate to always go back to the NHL for example, but it's a great example. There's young 20-year-olds. His name is Nathan MacKinnon. He's about 24 years old. He's up for the MVP award this year, which is the Hart Memorial Trophy. It's not called MVP, which is way cooler. That's a different rant. The NHL awards have actual names of people that were famous intellectual public figures in Canada a century ago, which is way cooler than, I'm sorry, Joe, NFL MVP, where fuck that. I don't care. This is called,
I agree.
You know what I'm saying? Like there's only one trophy in the NHL. In the NFL, every year they manufacture a new trophy. NHL, everyone who's been MVP in the NHL has touched that trophy, and then you give it back at the end of the year. So anyway, that's a side rant. But my main point is Nathan MacKinnon said, I'm 23 years old. I'm world famous. I'm generally regarded as one of the top 5 people in what I do. I'm trying to generalize it. So it could be you're a mathematician, you're a scientist, you're a writer, you're an NHL player. He's top 5 at what he does in the world. Millionaire, set for life, young. He has everything ahead of him. He said, I still experience nights where I couldn't sleep. I was anxious, and you know what helped him? He said, I went to therapy, and I continue to go to therapy, and it's the best thing I could ever do. So that stigma has gone away. Because in the 80s and the 90s, he would be ridiculed for that. People would be like, why is Nathan McKinnon? He's one of the best players in the world. Why is he going to therapy every week? But it works. It helped him. And he's continuing to do that because it's continuing to bring him health and success. So that it essentially, to bring it back to the topic of the podcast, it allays his fears. He's talking to someone every week so that this fear doesn't consume him. And it works.
How crazy is that, though? It's like that this one word and these sensations that we call fear can have so many different origins. Like that guy, for example, it's like, is it the fear of not doing his best, of letting his team down, or are his fears even more intimate and personal? It's, maybe has a family origin, or even though you said he's number 5 in the world, maybe he thinks he's a failure in some capacity. It's a kind of a crazy thing how many people you bump into in the world are actually being enslaved by their fears and are controlled by this series of sensations, this monkey on their back that is in a sense governing and controlling their freedoms. I don't know. It boggles my mind. It's a fascinating thing that people experience this, and sometimes they never shake it. So yeah, that's a great story, man.
Yeah, that's well said. And I think you nailed it when you said it's his fear because he has so many eyes on him, millions, hundreds of millions around the world, actually. It's a fear of not only just letting people down, letting himself down, not reaching the level that he's shown that he can achieve. And he said there's some seasons where there's ebb and flows, that he doesn't want to let down his teammates, his coaches, his family, his fans, the people he plays for the Colorado Avalanche, or the people of Colorado. There's in think about trying to go to sleep at night and knowing there's millions of people in the state of Colorado that rely on him and want him to do well because it brings them joy and satisfaction and pride. And he's thinking about this, and that's what was keeping him up at night. And therapy helped him do it. So you're right that there's this kind of fear doesn't discriminate. It can arrest anyone. It can put anyone in basically a mental prison.
I think you hit it pretty much on the head, Bob. Like, using therapy as a way to allay your fear could be some of the most therapeutic things you can do to try to move past this hurdle that's in front of you. I know it was something I was thinking about before the quarantine hit, just to get my mind in a different headspace, because there's I think everybody has their own little thing that kind of eats at them, and I know for me, I just like you, Rob, I tend to internalize. And it's always good to go to like a friend or family member. I go to my sister a lot, and just try to talk things out. But going to a therapist, it can be beneficial to your mental and physical health. And it's definitely not as stigmatized as it used to be, like you said, in the 80s or 90s, and hell, even before that, like the 60s and 70s. It was probably much worse.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, think about that. Like how did you tell people back in the day if you were going through an emotional upheaval, or you're having anxiety? How would you articulate that? Like, I'm afraid of this. And people would say, well, that's not even reality. What are you talking about? That's in your, like, that's not going on. It's a possibility. It's something in your head. And now, like, the word anxiety, if someone uses it, there's more of a general consensus of like, oh, you're going through something. It's not a matter of snapping you out of it, or you're not thinking clearly. It's like something inside of you. You're in a loop, and you as a person might not be able to break that loop yourself. Like, you need an outside person. You need someone close to you, or you need someone who's not close to you, who's like purely objective and can kind of help you see that loop and break it. I have a question though for you guys. Back to fear. Do you think that okay, how I'm thinking how to put this. I've thought about fear in different ways, right? Think about fear from an evolutionary standpoint. It would say you develop these sensations to warn you of a danger, right? Just the reason, like if you're near a shark and it's coming near you, your body is going to start to go on fire. You're going to freak out because it's like your your genetic memory is saying, hey, this thing has killed a lot of us. Be afraid. When you're afraid, right, you have to flee or you're going to have to fight. And I wonder, is when you, at a psychological level, when we have these fears, are they telling us to stop, or are they trying to get our attention about something? And maybe we're kind of going in a different area, but I think sometimes when you talk to someone who is a therapist or a psychologist, that sometimes our unconscious tries to warn us of things and also bring things to our conscious mind that says, hey, like you're feeling this way because this is important. Actually, you need to invest more energy. You need to focus on this. And it's not, because usually when you say fear, all right, this is a fearful situation. This is frightening. I'm going to go away from it so that the fear is resolved, right? There's a dangerous dog in my way. Well, I'm going to go away from the dog, and then I don't feel fear anymore because I'm away from the danger. And I wonder if sometimes your body is giving you these sensations, these alarms saying, hey, you keep feeling this way because there's something here you're not addressing. And really that fear is trying to say, hey, there's a block here. And rather than going away from it, you need to find a way through the block, resolve the fear, and then become stronger in that process. And I'm not a psychologist or a therapist. I could be completely talking out my ass. I read way too much sci-fi. So anyone who's listening who is going through something, take everything I say with a grain of salt. But I think about this sometimes. It's like, fear of rejection, right? People are afraid to, let's say, approach a girl. Well, so what do? You don't approach a girl. You go away from the obstacle. Whereas anyone you've talked to who said, you know what, I'm tired of being afraid and going away, I'm going to go forward. Eventually, they break through that barrier. That thing is no longer fearful. And actually, like if you play video games, a new level has opened up for them. And now their life is now enriched because they took the sign from the mind saying, hey, this is the thing we need. We need to go towards it. And you feel afraid. That means we need it even more. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Well, first of all, before I answer that question, I'm looking at Christopher Corvo right now, and he looks like he just stepped off the set of Grease. He has a tank top on. He has the slick back hair. He's going full Guido Scarducci right now. He's going. It's going. It looks good, bud. It looks good. That's quite the look you have. I like it. You should be rocking that look. Maybe a mustache though.
I got to go full stash, thick stash, 70s porn. So okay, I got
No, don't
not
do
that thick.
Don't do that.
All right. But to answer your question seriously, I think you hit it on the latter part of that. Is fear is chemical. It's just excretion that comes out of your brain that controls your thoughts, your nervous system, and your movement. It's biological. It's hard to fight that because there's certain things that you can fear, like rejection. There's certain people that are crippled by the fear of rejection. There's certain people that actually get off on it. It doesn't matter. They can approach any girl at a bar. They don't care at all if they're rejected. But there's certain people that literally won't even go out of their house because the thought of even getting rejected by a girl at a bar or a guy at a bar, it doesn't matter, whatever you fancy, is so crippling to them that they'd rather just stay at home. So it does control your actions. It's hard to control. But I would say there's two things to kind of mitigate that. You have to be aware of it. First, you need self-awareness. You need to be aware, like, these are the things that I don't like and that scare me and that I'm afraid of. So I know it. And the second way is sometimes direct confrontation with it helps ease that. And that's how I got over that, because I was one of those when I was a teenager who feared things like rejection, and I feared heights. I feared heights tremendously, but I would never even dream of going on a roller coaster. But once I did it, once I literally coach myself up, I pet myself up. It's kind of, yes, other people can help you and external forces can help you, but you really have to just come face to face with it and deal with it. It's an individual thing. You need to bring it up with inside of you and face it, and that usually helps it. And I rode my first roller coaster, and now I love roller coasters. I'll get on any one, except the Thunderbolt in Coney Island. That one's pretty fucking scary. You guys ever seen that one? The orange one in Coney Island that just drops straight down? That's a motherfucker. I don't know if I want to do that. But because I have a story about Six Flags, which I'll tell at another time, but it was bad. I got vertigo, essentially. I gave
Really?
myself vertigo because when you can lock in, because obviously there's people that are different sizes and different weights that get on roller coasters. You can lock in the safety harness in certain degrees. And I left it 1 degree more than I should have. So I was like floating around in there, and almost to the point where I thought I was going to just fucking fly out, just get shot out of the roller coaster, which was dumb, which was very dumb. I should have locked it in fully. So that scared me for a little while. It gave me vertigo. I was dizzy and nauseous and vomiting the rest of the time I was at Six Flags. But to come back to the point, fear, if you the good thing I would say, and I want the audience to know as well, the good thing about fear is you do have an element of control over it. Yes, it seems daunting or crippling at times, but it's within you. You have the ability mentally, and there's also a physical component to it, to sort of rein it in. And the best people can take that fear and use it in a positive way. They take that energy, that light, that force, which is very powerful. And if you can channel that and use it in a good way, you're kind of unstoppable at that
Well
point.
said.
Rob's little monologue actually has me thinking. I feel like having a support system early on in childhood really, really helps. I feel like not enough parents talk to their children about things like fear and death and uh, not having enough confidence to speak to people and all the things that kind of rack people's brains when they get older on in life, and it's harder to adapt. I think it's a big deal to have some, like I said before, and like both of you said before, having a support system, but having parents who can really instill that into you early on is a big deal, because the older you are, it's just harder to just get out of your set ways of dealing with these trepidations and fear.
Yeah, Joe, you brought up a excellent point. I'm actually like really glad you did that. You're right. Parenting. I mean, parenting, what you said is it's kind of a crazy thing that you are really helped or hindered by what your parents have experienced and how well and able they are to convey stuff to you and to teach you these human lessons that could be very fundamental to you in your own development. And if they didn't learn it or are not self-aware enough, in many ways you're going to have to try to reinvent the wheel and figure it out yourself. What is something that you think you would, if you had kids, I don't know if you want to or not, but what is something that you would want to teach them in order to kind of help prepare them in a way to deal with fears or to overcome these things? Or what would you do things to try to prevent them from even being afraid or even having an issue in the beginning?
I know for me personally, the one thing that I experienced was really more of my parents trying to shelter me from everything. And I just being an adult now, if I ever have kids, which I don't know if I ever want to, if I do though, I would want to not. I would do the opposite, not shelter them. I want to kind of expose them to as much um, kind of feelings as possible, and go over how I would deal with them and how maybe they should actually approach these things that kind of make them feel good or make them feel bad. Because the earlier on they can figure out what to do, the better.
Is there anything that you would do? Anything as like in order to test them? Would you put them in like a fearful situations in order to kind of like instill in them that ability to overcome?
No, not at all. That's definitely not my way of doing things. You're kind of reminding me of like the movie Hannah, where this CIA agent is kind of like training his daughter to be like the ultimate like hunter and killer. And I that's not something I would do. I know with me, if a situation arises, I'll address it. I'll try to address it immediately. Like watching something like Terminator, I know my parents weren't around to actually watch it with me, and if I had kids, I'd probably watch as much as I could with them and try to explain what I'm feeling, what they're possibly feeling, and just go over that either after the movie or during the movie, or if let's say they're out on like a baseball diamond and they're kind of afraid of a tough situation to go through, same thing, just talk it out and be there as a physical and mental support system for them.
I have a question for you guys. What is something you are afraid of that you've had to overcome? Rob gave us a good example, like both his fear of heights and, as a teenager learning how to, interact with women. What is something that you had to overcome yourself? Where it's like you were afraid of this, like maybe you were terrified of it, but you, rather than running away from that fear, you said, "No, I have to figure this out because I can't keep running. Like I need to steer into this storm and try to get through it and to the other side." So have you ever had that experience in your own life, Joe?
I've had numerous experiences, and to be honest, I don't think I've really, even to this day, got fully gotten over it. It's just really managing the situations a little bit better. Like me talking in public in front of a big crowd, that's still a big deal for me. Or talking to uh, a woman that I'm really interested in and being unsure about what their feelings may be, that's something that still bothers me. But it's just really the thing is for me to just deal with the situation as it comes and managing it so that I don't, like Rob gets, kind of wound up to the point where I can't sleep or I can't think about anything else, because it'll manifest its way in a physical way, and that's one thing I really do not want.
Do you feel it's like a muscle? Like this overcoming a fear is like something, a perpetual muscle that you need to work, and if you get lax with it, then your ability to kind of push through and deal with fear starts to weaken?
It should be something like that, but that's not the way I approach it. I kind of approach it as it comes, but it should be a thing that should be kind of practice and kind of massage to the point where I can kind of either manage it to the point where it's not perceived as an issue, or just manage it where I can overcome it at another point. But I don't approach it that way
I
though.
like that you said massage. You massage it.
Yeah, so the thing that I think you hit on it, Chris, the thing for me, the greatest fear that I had to overcome was fear of high pressure situations. And as you said, sort of the courtship of the female gender. And a lot of it was a product of when I was in grade school and high school. I went to an all boys high school. So when I got to college, I like to say I was 4 years behind everyone socially.
Really?
So approach it, because when I was in high school, all I did was go to class, do my homework, play sports, play video games, hang out with my brother. That's it. Never went to parties. I never touched a single substance until I was in college, until I was 18. Never spoken to a woman. I never spoke to a woman other than my mother or whatever, someone at the grocery store. I never courted a female until I was 18 in college.
Those last two things are completely wild to me now that I know you.
Yeah, right. But what I say is I took like a duck to water. It was always in me. I innately had the ability to do so. But it was to the. I'll tell an embarrassing story. Like this is for the females out there, our female audience. The first time I was courting a woman, I was in a party in the West Village. I'm not going to name the schools or anything. Once again, we do no names, but you can probably surmise what I'm talking about. So I lived on McDougal Street in West 3rd as an 18-year-old. So imagine living right off of Washington Square Park as an 18-year-old man who was a virgin, who's never done anything with a woman, let alone try to party around them in a social environment. And so I had immense fear going into this party, and I was like, and it's in my head, I didn't know how to act. How do I behave? I kind of was in my own head in the sense of, should I stand this way? Is it cool? Do I look cool standing this way? Should I put my hand in my pocket? Is it better if I open my body up this way and this way? So I was constantly going through all of that in my head. And there's this woman, God bless her soul, because she was such a sweetheart, because I embarrassed myself tremendously. So I was trying to sort of dance with her. At that time, you guys know me now, I'll cut a rug on the dance floor just for hours. That's my element. But back then, I was still gun shy about it. And so we were dancing, and you can tell, the look where the person that you're interested in gives you, where you just make the move. They're looking at you deep in your eyes, and they're saying, just go for it. So she was giving me that look, and I say, quote, "Is it okay if I kiss you right now?" And then her face dropped. She was totally uninterested at that point. And then before she turned away and walked away, she said, "You never ask. You just go for it. Don't ever ask." So I embarrassed myself there because I had to. Coincidentally enough, she ended up living in the same building that I was living in. So I had to see her all the time in the elevator, and I was like, oh, God, here we go again. And it was bad. But I was so stunted by my upbringing. I had a strict household. I wasn't allowed to do a lot of things. The school that I went to in the Bronx had not a single female in the building. It was all teenage boys and all Jesuit priests. There wasn't a single female. So I had no interaction. I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. And college was a giant wake-up call because everyone of my friends around me were like, what the hell, man? What did you just do? She was clearly into you. And I was like, I don't know, man. I don't know what I was doing. And I kind of there was a little element of humiliation and shame about it but I want both of you to know, and the audience as well, I was so scared going to parties when I was a freshman because I wasn't even high. I didn't even smoke weed. Certainly not the amount that I do now. And I was always like, is it cool if I stand over here? Should I go get her a drink? Should I turn this way? Am I talking to her too long? Is 10 minutes too much? Should I go away and come back? Like this is the shit that I was thinking about in my head. So that was the biggest fear that I had to get over. And then the last point I want to make is I'm still kind of scared of this to this day is I'm afraid of the dark. I fear the darkness intensely. I cannot sleep in a room that's completely dark. I have to have a nightlight. There has to be some kind of light on for me to sleep because the way my mind works, I cannot sleep in complete pitch black. I won't fall asleep. I'll just be so scared. And it's because of, I guess, which is strange because I do like horror movies. I do like, I watch like ghost story shows and all this, but sleeping in the dark, can't do it. Can't do it. And I was lucky because I think it's a product of me growing up and always having my brother in my room. I always had someone else sleeping in the same room as me. I've never for a prolonged state of time slept in a room by myself in the complete darkness. So I always need a nightlight. Even mid-30s, I'm still rocking a nightlight.
First of all, that's a great story. I'm surprised I've never heard of that before. And two, I don't see what the big problem is in terms of asking a lady to kiss her. I get it. It's college, especially freshman year, but that's not that big of a deal.
I agree, but you just got to make the move. That's what they want. That's what they want. They don't want you to ask permission. Just go for it. And if they don't want it, they'll pull back. At least that's the way she took it. But I'm sort of with you, Joe. I thought that was the right thing to do.
That's odd to me because if they really wanted it, I don't think that would have been an issue. I honestly believe that. If she felt that she really was into you,
I
then
agree.
she would have just said, "Yeah, let's kiss or let's make out."
I agree.
She wouldn't say that. That's a cop out to me.
Yeah, well, fair enough. I think, but that's literally what she told me, and it embarrassed me. Because not everyone was watching you the whole time, but they
But
were
you felt like
definitely,
it was
yeah,
probably in that
yeah,
moment.
absolutely, absolutely. She was. As soon as I asked that question, I was done.
But I gotta say, man, you gotta think that was you actually persevering and pushing through fear. Like that's how I read that story. It wasn't like fear stopped you. Actually, you pushed through fear and you had to deal with rejection in this case. But
Precisely. Yeah.
yeah, you stretched and exercised that muscle, which is like, hey, that even you got to pat your 18-year-old self on the back because how many people would have let that 18 they that 18 would have turned into 30 years or maybe 40 years, but at least you were like, nah, like I have to make a change. It's gonna be a little painful, but I got to do it.
That's right. That's right. Before you go, Joe, you're right. I think somehow I had a sense of that where, like you said, it was a physical. It was a physical need to do that because I didn't want to get trapped in my own fear. In my head, I said, if I don't do this, this is going to continue to consume.
And that's kind of my point too. To circle back to just kind of being more of a teacher to your children, I feel like if you go through these situations early on instead of like in college, you're more likely to be you can adapt to these situations much easier, much better. And I know for me, I was very much in the same situation as you. I went to a Catholic school for my elementary and junior high years. Queen of All Saints in Clinton Hill, Brooklyn, and it was pretty much very similar. It was integrated with girls and boys, but still, you couldn't do anything there. And I just wish as a child I wasn't as sheltered as I was, 'cause I would have gotten a lot of the shit that I've dealt with, or even still to this day go through, out of the way. If I was really more in a less sheltered situation.
Yeah, dude, I really do. I've thought about this so much, like especially children and upbringing. Like I'm glad you brought that up earlier, Joe. Is I do believe that. I think that a lot of the things we're talking about anxiety and these different fears, right? They're not fears of death, right? Like a lot of the fears we're talking about are the stakes are very low. Like fear of talking to a woman, the stakes are really low. Yet in our biology, the stakes are really high, like to the point where you could have a nervous breakdown approaching someone or speaking in public in front of other people. You ain't gonna die, no one's gonna kill you, but your body is sending you those real impulses of like this is life or death. And I do think parenting, I do think you can maybe nip some of those things in the bud, um, in childhood. Maybe I'm wrong. I really don't know.
I don't think you're wrong at all. I think that's the biggest determining factor in how adults are not really adjusted to dealing with things like fear. It has to be addressed early on when our brains can soak up as much information as possible. Because if it's not, then it's just gonna manifest its way in a terrible, terrible way.
Yeah, I think you're right, Joe. If it's not taken care of early on, it it can almost consume you because it gets larger and larger. It's like a beast that grows inside of you, and it gets scarier and scarier and scarier and scarier, and it gets more difficult to deal with. The longer you put it, it's almost with anything else. The longer you put it aside, the the harder it gets, the more pressure it is on, the more difficult it is to deal with, the more frightening it can be.
I know for me personally, dealing with parents who work a lot and kind of have they deal with their own shit on a day-to-day basis, I can understand why it kind of gets overlooked. But yeah, I just feel like it's something that should be addressed. I know for me, when September 11th happened, I was kind of I was freaked out. It was my first day of college, and boom, it's something like that just kind of shakes up the whole world, and you're not really sure what to do, especially when you just now feel like the world is kind of your oyster, and you just you're kind of shaken, and there's not really much support from your parents because they have to deal with their own thing, and I just think there should be more. It's a generational thing too. I understand that, but there should be more support from parents to their children when it comes to these these disasters that come about, and not of our own making. It just happens, like the coronavirus, just things in general. You should just talk about it more.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. But it's tough. Like, as a parent, what do you want to do? Do you want to? It depends actually on the fortitude of the parents. Do they want to delve into those subjects early on to make sure that they almost build up an immunity to it when you grow up? I don't know, man. That's tough for from a parenting perspective because you don't want to push too much on a child too early because that can also have an adverse effect. So it's a slippery slope there. But if I may, I want to, before we go on, I have a quick story. It kind of ties into what every both of you are saying, but it's one of my favorite stories about fear and being frightened. Is when I took the bar exam. How long ago was this? It's almost 10 years ago at this point. It's like 8, and I walk in. It was at the Javits Center in New York. They clear out the Javits Center for 3 days so that everyone can take this goddamn exam. And I walk in. It starts very early in the morning. It's like 8 o'clock, and you know that feeling. Both of you, do you know that feeling that you get when there's a big life event happening? You have to give a big speech. There's a big examination you have to take. You have that feeling in your gut. It's nerves. It's butterflies. It's everything. It's anxiety, and it's physical. It's like some people were shaking, and I remember walking in. And speaking of physical, and one of my good law school friends also noticed the same thing, which so he'll know who he is when he hears the story. I walk into the Javits Center, and the men's bathroom line is like 40 people deep, and I'm looking and I'm like, why are there this many guys in the bathroom line? And then I'm looking around, and I kind of poke my head into the bathroom because I didn't want to wait that long. I had to pee. I had to piss. I had to rock a piss, as I like to say. And I looked in, and the urinals were free. And I'm like, why are there 40 people in line waiting specifically for stalls? Is everyone doing drugs here? Like, what's happening? And I noticed that every one of those guys waiting for the men's bathroom was literally shitting their pants, waiting to take this test. All the urinals were free. There was 40 people in line waiting for the stalls in the Javits Center. Everyone was so scared the morning of that test that every single guy in the whole Javits Center had to take a shit right then and there. How about that? Like that's what fear can do to you physically.
That's crazy. And for anyone listening who is taking the bar, there's a lesson here. Go to the bathroom before you get there. Don't eat a
Absolutely.
big breakfast.
Absolutely. Don't eat anything. Don't eat anything. Because once you step in that fucking center, you will have to take a shit. You're just gonna get so nervous.
That's wild. I thought when you were going with that story, I thought you were gonna say that they were kind of just vomiting, but that's even
Fear
worse.
and stress, it's crazy.
Yeah, no, it literally moved everyone's bowels. The line was so deep. And I just walked in and I rocked my piss and I walked back out. Because I didn't eat breakfast. I didn't eat it. I knew kind of. I'm not going to say I was smart enough to know that that would happen. I could never foresee a line that deep. But I think I was just too nervous that I couldn't even get anything down.
Are there any techniques that you employ in your own lives to combat fear? I know Rob kind of mentioned he felt that yoga, these meditative practices that kind of center him would help him. But are there anything else that you guys do, maybe instinctively, or you've read or learned that you employ in your own lives now when you're starting to feel apprehensive, fearful, anxiety is starting to brew?
Yeah, what I've found is very helpful is breathing. Concentrate on your breath. And that serves to calm you down. And there's also a physical nature to it, biologically. The more oxygen that you can get into yourself with deep breaths and deep um, out breaths, is it slows you down. It serves to physically suppress your heart rate and it could be the shaking or the anxiety. So a lot of us, if anyone who's read the Journey of Socrates book by Dan Millman, we'll talk. That'll be a future episode because that's coming too. Um, no one, almost no one on this planet breathes correctly. Breath is something you should be concentrating on, and if you do concentrating on it, it does work wonders. So just if you're ever in a situation where it's a high intense situation, there's high pressure, there's a lot of weight, there's fear, there's frightening, there's the unknown, there's that finality that we're talking about in the beginning. If you can somehow get your mind and focus yourself to slow down and just take giant deep breaths in, usually 3 to 5 of them will do it. Deep breath in, deep breath out. It does help. It's crazy how much it helps. And you don't think you think, oh, I breathe all the time. I'm breathing normally. You're not breathing the correct way though. You're not giving your body the requisite amount of oxygen that it needs, and that's why you're feeling all this sense of nervousness and like high anxiety. So just breathe. Breathing, slowing down your breath, and taking deep breaths is one of the best ways. It's one of the easiest ways. It's hard to do because you don't think it'll be that effective, but it's highly effective.
What about you, Joe? Any takeaways? Any skills or habits you use?
Damn, Bobby, that was pretty much right on the money. I know I usually focus a lot on like weight training, and that's like one of my like passions. And I've just started to get into yoga, and I know I don't breathe nearly as well as I should, and I'm starting to get into yoga, and I really need to focus on breathing as part of my yoga routine because I really focus more on the stretching part, and breathing needs to be a part of it. So yeah, yoga it has to be a big part for me, and I would suggest anyone who's not into yoga, they get into it. It really helps kind of it helps you tap into how you deal with your body on a not even on a day-to-day basis, like a minute-to-minute basis, but also just focusing on things that you do have control over. I think too many people focus on things that they don't have control over, and it's just pointless to me. Just focusing on things that you do have control over is the key, and kind of not being afraid of fear. Just if it arises, try to deal with it in the best way you can, and being honest with whoever you're dealing with it with. If you're in a therapy situation, or if you're talking to someone who you're kind of afraid to talk to, just be open and honest with them about it. Most people understand.
Well said. Well said, both you guys. Rob, you have any final words, final thoughts before we wrap this episode up?
Yeah. If you're afraid of the dark and you want to talk about it, I'm open. I'm here for you. I'll support you. Let's swap stories because I share the same fear, and I'm a man in my mid-30s and I'm still scared of the dark. So how about that? I'll admit that. Yeah.
That might be the biggest revelation I've heard in many of these episodes from you.
Yeah, I can't. I'll never sleep in total darkness. I can't. But it's like you said, Joe. It's was a condition from my childhood that I never shook properly. So I think we're too far gone at this point. But on a serious note, yeah, fear. I want everyone to know your fear is in your control. You just, as Joe said, do the things that make you happy. Exercise, read, distract yourself, breathe, remember to breathe, always breathe.